I mean, you can, and people do, and some people manage to even fool other people into thinking they're amazers, but it's really easy to delude yourself. So I think it is necessary to have some quality of scepticism, otherwise you go off your rocker basically, and I've met quite a few people who have, which I've studiously tried to avoid doing the same, at least for an extended period. I think some quality of scepticism is important, but on the other hand, if it becomes an absolute thing for you, that certain things do happen and don't happen, I think I can always say, well, you know, what an impoverished life. I mean, because where do you set the limits for what does and does not happen? I mean, we can take the case of Skinner's behaviourism. There was no room for consciousness in it. You know, in fact, for years, consciousness was something that was not studied by psychology because it didn't fit into the models.
Because you couldn't observe it.
You couldn't observe it in the laboratory.
Is that actually,
it is true.
That is true.
It's the black box theory. You put stuff in, and then people do things, and you can observe what you put in, and you can observe what they do after you've put it in. So if you flash someone in the face with a light and shout "wanker," you can observe them going, "What are we doing that for?" And that's it.
Now, to some extent, that is useful because it stops you projecting on people. You know, it stops you sort of to a certain extent. But I mean, it's not useful in lots of other ways. If you want a really boring read, people read B.F. Skinner's Walden 2 novel, which is all about an ideal community set up on the lines of Skinner's kind of like, you know, rats in boxes. And it's a real. And I used to be quite into this sort of stuff because I had to study Skinner quite deeply. And when he started explaining art in terms of stimulus response loops and stuff, I just thought,
oh, that's one useful model though. That's a really useful model.
It's a useful model. Now I'll develop this by saying that when I was trained as an occupational therapist, this again comes back to the idea of many models, as is what is for me was useful about that training, and what I've since I think is come out very strongly in my logical approach, is that I was trained to have lots of models and apply the right model to the right situation. So if I was working with somebody who, well, I'll give you an example. We had a woman who just screamed all the time, and we would be sat there, you know, doing our daily activities or something, chopping up sandwiches or making toast, and she'd suddenly rip one out and everybody would jump out of their boots. And my task, apropos this woman, was to first stop her screaming.
Yeah.
So I did this by saying, getting everybody else in the group together, saying, look, when so-and-so screams, just don't react. It's negative reinforcement. And it worked. She went from suddenly screaming at random and making everybody shocked, and because nobody else people stopped reacting to it, and I just say, oh, you feel better for that, good, and carry on. Then she started saying, I'm going to scream, and then she stopped screaming. And then, having got rid of her mad behaviour, we then went in with the psychoanalytic model. And the therapy models, you know, where we actually started to uncover processes for it. But for dealing with that dealing with her kind of like that particular piece of behaviour, a behaviourist model was the right model to use. And I think you can do this as a magician. Certainly, you can apply. When I was doing lots of magical work with people on a client basis, I'd often go in and say, "Well, what's the problem?" And they say, "Well, I want this." Doing things like that, and I think, oh, I could do a really minimalist ritual, you know, but no, they want a spectacle. Let's pull out all the stops and do something with lots of, you know, shouting and effing and blinding and all the rest of it, something that really makes them feel like they've done something to change themselves. So this is where many models can work, but you have to know those models and you have to be able to apply them sensitively and apply them to the situation.
It's my thing about using the right tools for the right job.
And I think scepticism and atheism are all right in the place. Like, you know, being a fundamentalist Christian is okay in its place as long as you don't go around bothering other people. But of course, most of them do.
It doesn't really work. Did you do a lot of client-based magic?
That's when I wrote that horrible title, Urban Shaman Trilogy. I didn't call it that, but that's what it got called. And that's when I was living in Leeds on the dole, doing exorcisms and tarot readings and house cleanings and rituals for other people. I did it for about 3 or 4 years. The best thing that came out of it was friendship, which I think it wasn't I wasn't charging people an arm and a leg because you know we were all on a low income, but it made me friends, which I think is you know
What can do worse?
Possibly better than having clients. It's
Yeah.
having friends, you know.
Yeah.
That sounds like a really good example of sort of community kind of, you know, activism in effect. Really.
Well, I think that possibly a good thing about the rise of interest in shamanism is that shamanism isn't about being a shaman on your own. It's about for me anyway, working in a shamanic fashion. I'll say not being a shaman, because that sounds horrible. I wouldn't like to be called a shaman. Is about working within a local community, you know. And in our local community, we have people who you'd go and see if you want your dole claim sorted out. Somebody else who could pick locks very well. Yeah. Somebody else who had like the best information on squatting, and you know, if you had something horrible in your basement that seemed to be scaring you,
Phil would sort you out.
Phil would come around and look in your basement and then run away very quickly sometimes. I think magic is often presented in a way that puts people off. You know, arcade secret in the British Library, you know, which is fine if you want to get into that stuff. But I mean, you know, I think what is something that is really magical will be understood by anybody, and hopefully transmitted by somebody who doesn't use too many fucking big words and come over like a prat. You know, what I try and do as much as possible is, if I'm talking or writing about magical techniques, I'll try and do it in a bit of a silly way, really. Partly to de-authoritarianise it, because they're just my opinions, you know. And partly because I think if you can put weird bollocks across to people in a very weird way, or make it at least seem a bit safe, then they might pick up that ball and run with it. I mean, you know, your AAA stuff is, I think, is very much the same sort of thing. It's really fucking off the wall stuff if you take it from a logical sort of positivist view. But because it's put away in such a kind of like sort of non-threatening way, I think you kind of like
people
slip
get into it, yeah.
You know, like, because I think all magic, if it's engaged towards other people, is a reaching out, and what comes back from that is warmth, support. I mean, half the things I've done in my life under the banner of like magic, whether it be magazines or books or whatever, wouldn't have been done if it wasn't for somebody going, "That's a good fucking idea, let's do it." You know, and that sort of rush of somebody else's confidence coming at you full strength and in your face and lifting you up, making you feel yes. I think that's essential, and just it's the bollocks. You know? Yeah. When somebody else comes and says, "Yeah, that's a good fucking idea, let's do it," that's magic. It needn't necessarily be like just explained in terms of the etheric plane and blah blah waffle blah bullshit. You know, but it's magic nonetheless. I used to have a female friend who was like married and in her 40s with 2 kids and got into magic, and her husband was kind of like totally, you know, like not interested, unaware. And the thing she said to me, which actually really made a strong impact with me, is she said, "Look, all this stuff you do, I don't have time to do it. You know, I've got to look after the kids. I don't get the space to go away and meditate, or to do a ritual, or to read this or that book, you know." And I just thought, yeah, that's so fucking important, you know. It's like it's really easy to be a magician if you're on the dole, a student, or, you know, don't have to worry about making it right. In fact, you know, the magic used to be the pursuit of the muddy middle classes for that very reason, because they didn't have to work. And then you can spend all your time reading funny books in the British Library and, you know,
buy robes and
buying
going up
robes
mountains.
Going up mountains, getting yourself thrown out of country.